in the interest of time, I want to make sure that we get started on time. So if you would please find your seats. Excuse me, if you would please find your seats so that we may get started, yes. And then I also want us to fill in some of the space. We're a pretty intimate group, and so if we're sitting on the outliers, if we could move in, that would be great as well. Thank you.
Agenda?
And as we're waiting to make the formal start, if you all could respond to this prompt, that would be great as well.
Good evening.
That is for the webcast.
Okay.
So they're not, you just have to project.
I just have to project. So, I was talking into a microphone that wasn't even prepared for me, but that's okay. I can project. Again, welcome. I'm Dolores Rhodes. This is not on. It's on for those that are working here. I'm Dolores Rhodes, and I am so happy to be a part of the African American Heritage Commission. When I was appointed by the governor, I felt this was the time to link some of the events that are going on throughout the state with Wilmington. Wilmington has a history that we cannot ignore. And as we travel throughout North Carolina, addressing some of the inequities that have happened to us, we thought Wilmington really needs the information, and it needs to find a way to connect to the youth so we can spread the knowledge that has been uncovered. Tonight, I'm glad that you're here to witness the last of the marker sites. And these are the sites where the enslaved slave Africans disembarked directly from the African continent. The group that you will see tonight, which I am about to address, will talk to you a little bit about their travels. And tonight, we're in Wilmington. So we'll hear about that and see how it all flows together. There are several other initiatives from the state that we want you to keep looking out for and listening up. We talked about the Green Book last month. And of course, our acting director will give you more information about upcoming events. Now, let me start off by introducing the Assistant Secretary for Diversity and Inclusion from the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. And where is Miss Tracy Burns? Did she run out for just a moment? I'll point to her when she comes back in the door, all right? Angela Thorpe Angela Thorpe is the acting director for the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission, and she is our leader, and she's doing a good job. Kimi Lassiter, where are you, Kimi? She's still outside of the door as well. She is the constituent affairs liaison that gives us all of the information from one area of North Carolina to another and brings it all together, and you can look out anytime to have a call from her. She likes to call to keep us up with what's happening, and I like that. So we welcome you to Wilmington, and now I would like to turn the program over to no one but Angela Thorpe, our acting director. Thank you, Commissioner.
And I will take this from you.
Yes, can you get it off?
Yes,
That's the
I can.
problem. It's a
Look.
little tight.
Got the magic touch, you see?
Got the magic
Yes.
touch.
Okay.
All right.
Great, thank you. Okay. So everyone, you all saw a prompt when you walked in the room. If you've not had an opportunity to respond to that, while I hook myself to this mic, I'm going to ask you all to respond to this prompt that's on the screen.
There's Tracy coming in now.
And once you've had an opportunity to respond to this prompt, if you can just raise your hand, maybe make a little noise, so I know when we're done, or a lot of noise, whatever you prefer, okay? Okay. How are we doing over here in the middle? Good? Okay, great. So I'm going to ask us to speak out some of the names of these people who are on our note card. I'll ask maybe 1 to 5 people to share. Who's somebody that you've written down on your note card? Yes, please.
Maya Angelou.
Maya Angelou. What was the impact she had on your life?
I met her back in 1994.
Oh,
I was
wow.
working with a group of youth, Teen Spirit, girls ages 10 to 15
Yeah.
years old, and she came to Raleigh, North Carolina.
Wow.
So working in community at that time and being able to have that group of young ladies there to see her,
Yeah.
now that she's transitioned, the impact that it played on
Yes.
their life, hopefully, just her strength, her character,
Yeah.
and just everything that she had to offer them made me into the phenomenal woman that I am today.
Awesome. Wonderful reflections on Dr. Angelou's impact on your life. Anyone else like to share their name?
Very McLeod Bethune,
Okay.
because when I read a biography of her as a youth, as a teen, it influenced me.
Okay.
It made me want to read more and find out more, and it just made an impact.
Great. Thank you. Right over here. Anyone want to share out their names? No? Okay.
Yes, I'm on the board of the North Carolina Maritime Museum at Southport, and there's a gentleman, one of my colleagues, named Donnie Jordan.
Okay.
And Donnie was he's very instrumental in this church as a reporter.
Great.
But he also had me build a room with a young lady who was putting on a performance.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
my wife agreed.
And in that process, or as a result of that experience, you were connected to a cultural tradition that's deeply rooted in the Black community. I'll take one more name. Maybe, yes, ma'am, right here? Yes.
My person who made the impact on me would be my mom.
Okay.
She was a community person and a civic-minded person.
Great. Thank you.
So I learned those things from her.
Thank you. And I can see that you are civic-minded as well just by being here. So obviously that impact was long-lasting. And so I ask that everyone in this room hold that name of that person on your card close to you as we walk through today's discussion. Chances are
that individual who is on your card was impacted by slavery and or is legacies. However, they still managed to make lives, find love, create children who they had an impact on them. And so again, I just ask that you hold that person close to you as we work through today's discussion, because some things will rise to the top that might not feel so comfortable. But remember, that person who's on your card made it through, and you are here in part as a result of them. And I'm going to have some homework for you at the very end that's related to that card as well. So please, again, just hold it close to you. My name, again, is Angela Thorpe, and I have the pleasure of serving as the acting director of the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission. And we are here today to talk to you about our newest initiative, Africa to Carolina. We hold it as our mission to preserve, promote, and protect North Carolina's African American history, arts, and culture for all people, and we do that in a number of ways. You heard Commissioner Rhodes talk about our Green Book project, which I'd be happy to talk to you more about later today. But again, one of those ways that we are uplifting our mission is by this Africa to Carolina initiative. The goal of this project is to identify and physically mark each site in the state where enslaved Africans disembarked directly from the African continent. And you'll see here on the right of the screen some of those spaces. And so we've traveled across the state to gain input, share stories, and to learn from you about how these legacies have directly affected your communities. And we're going to do some of that here today. And so today is about working together. You will hear from me, but not from the whole meeting. Our goal today really is to hear from you. We want to work together to start the process of shaping a physical marker that is unique to Wilmington. Again, we've traveled across the state, and so the stories we've heard in every single community have been different. And so we want to create markers that again, are responsive and reflective of the stories in all of those communities that you saw on the screen before. So today we're going to start kind of jogging our brains by taking a look at markers from similar projects across the country. And then I'm going to turn it over to my co-facilitator, Janine Bryant, who will work with you to explore and connect with stories and local history here so that we can, again, work pretty diligently to capture stories that are unique to Wilmington. So let's start by taking a look at some work across the nation. I prefer not to be behind a podium, but I don't have a clicker, so you'll have to bear with me. I want to get an idea of really how you are feeling about some of the work that you see across the country. You may like some of what you see, you may hate everything that you see, but we want to know so that we have a really clear understanding of what direction we should head in Wilmington. And so I ask for your feedback and for your participation during this part of the session. So you can see here in Fredericksburg, Virginia, they've got some pretty traditional waysides that are connected to the Middle Passage and the transatlantic slave trade. And if I pull this image back a little bit, you'll see again, it's kind of the traditional wayside that seems to be in a park, near a parking lot. Any thoughts on this wayside? Oh, that would be helpful, yeah. Kima's gonna do this. It's not visible, okay? It's easy to pass by. Okay. Okay, yes, that's a really good point. I don't know exactly what location it is. Mm-hmm. Rest stop, okay, it's at a rest stop.
It looks like it could be like a nature,
Okay,
you know,
okay,
information.
Is that
great.
water behind you?
It does look like water behind it, so it is on some sort of a waterfront, yeah. Okay, we can go to the next one. Okay, this is a marker that was completed in Galveston, Texas. You'll see that it's somewhat traditional. It does have kind of a map image in the center. And I will point out to the right here, this is a Sankofa symbol. This is the symbol that the Middle Passages and Port Markers Ceremonies projects uses to mark their work. This is a group who's doing this marking work all over the country, and they are actually an advisor to our project. So you're going to see this a few times, and this is a marker that they put up. So any thoughts on what you see here?
Stand more at an angle that's visible, that would invite you to come
Okay.
in to see what's on.
Okay, so not kind of feeling the angle. And the text is pretty small too, so you're talking about being able to see. Any other thoughts?
No
Ms. Lynn?
time periods, really.
Okay, no time periods, no dates. Okay,
Doesn't really give a lot of
of information. Okay,
personalized in it.
great. Okay, and go to the
think
next one.
that the caption
Mhm.
should have enslaved Africa.
Okay.
Someplace visible that will catch your attention walking by.
Very good. Okay. So this is a newer marker that's gone up in the last, I want to say 6 to 8 months. Again, that group that I just called out put this one up. They actually put 2 up in New Orleans and I'm going to show you both of them. This marker is kind of like that traditional history on a stick marker that we see a lot of places. It is located though in Jackson Square in New Orleans. And so if you're familiar with the city, you know it's a pretty heavily trafficked area. So any thoughts on what we're seeing here?
I like the African.
There's more information.
There's more information. We do like this image that's at the top there. Okay.
Also grabs your attention.
Okay. Okay.
It might be a little bit too much information though
Okay.
on these.
Okay. Did I hear something from over here?
That, the fact that it is those history on stick setup
Mm-hmm.
does lend it to easily damaged.
Okay. Very, very good point. And we've actually heard this in at least one more community, in communities that are affected by weather events, particularly hurricanes. We have to think of something that is going to be stable enough to withstand that. So thank you for bringing that up. That's a really great point. We can go to the next one.
This marker looks like it's two-sided.
Yep, it is two-sided. As is the next one, so this next one's two-sided, and we have an image of one side and the other. This is in the French Quarter in New Orleans, so another heavily trafficked area. Something I do like about this one is the different images, like you'll see an image here and an image here as well. But that's Angela's opinion. We're here to hear yours. So what are your thoughts on these markers? Okay.
Like I say, the text looks small and very high up. So
Okay. Small and high. Great. Any other thoughts?
Angela, do you know why the caption on the two markers are different?
I don't know why the captions
One
of the
says
markers.
slave
Yeah.
trade to Louisiana,
Mhm.
this talks about specifically to New Orleans.
Can we go back?
Yeah.
I think this one is speaking directly to the transatlantic slave trade and disembarkation. The next one is speaking to like domestic slave trade within the state and probably overland trade. Okay, we can go to the next one. Okay, so this is a marker that is in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. You can obviously see that it's very different. It is on the waterfront. But again, I want to hear your thoughts. What are we thinking about this one?
Too low to the ground.
Too low? Okay, very too low to the ground.
good question.
Okay.
How old is that one?
I'm sorry.
When was that one put up?
I'm not sure.
Last couple of years, right?
Yes, that one's fairly new, I believe, but I don't know the exact date.
It might be a little low, but I
Okay.
like the idea that it's on something other than a marker on a
Mhm.
stick. So
Okay.
it kind of grabs your attention a little bit more.
Great. Okay. Anything from you? Y'all have been a really quiet side. Yeah?
It appears that there are gantry cranes in the background there, maybe a shipyard or possibly
Mhm.
something along
It's
those
the
lines.
Portsmouth Naval Shipyard across the Piscataqua River in Kittery, Maine.
Thank you.
I used to live there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank Go to the next one. Okay, so here's one in Richmond, Virginia. And this is kind of a dual marker, if you will. So this panel back here has an image and some text, but you can see right in front of it stands a statue. This is the first marker we've seen that has some element of public art, if you will. So what are your thoughts on this one? You like this? Okay. It draws your attention.
One
Okay.
thing I like to, that I know when on a lot of the different signs, is I would prefer the embossed letter.
Okay.
Because it seems like it would hold up better.
Okay.
During the weather than these kinds of,
Got it.
painted.
Who's the sculptor? That's something that I can find out for you. Go ahead.
Just the others in this too, on this side, you know, you look at it as something historical and you think, oh, that's what happened, but with the statue, it speaks to your heart. Makes you a deeper understanding
Yeah.
of what's going on.
Yeah, yeah. And I would say, in terms of the sculptor, I can, again, certainly find out this information. We'll take note of that. But we are the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission. We have so many talented artists in our state, so many talented sculptors, excuse me. So if we were to head this direction, we would prefer to use an artist from our state.
An African American artist.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Okay, this is a marker that is in Sullivan's Island, South Carolina. Again, traditional, quite a bit of text. Any additional thoughts? Yes?
I think something that's provocative, that connects what was then and what is still going on that's negative, is inspiring in some ways, because there's so much history that's been written, and when somebody sees something they think is just more history to absorb and not be called in some way to some action about what's happening now would be, I think there are voices of people who are experiencing racism right now who would like to hear echoes of their voice in whatever happens.
Great, thank you. So something that's active, engaging, and speaks to experiences of people then and now.
I don't know what would draw me to that marker.
Okay. Yeah. So we're all like, meh, don't like this marker really. Okay. Go to the next one.
It looks like a welcome inside to a city. You
Okay.
read about the city.
That's good. Go ahead.
I just had a comment.
Sure.
I'm one of those nerds that I read every single one of these signs, and I just love it. But what would really draw me to a sign like that, or any sign, is perhaps I'm big into color-coded stuff. So I'm thinking, going back to that logo with the African state, country, continent, I'm sorry, continent, and perhaps, you know, it would, if I am very interested in this, obviously, and I wouldn't be here necessarily, but if all of those symbols would be on whatever pertains to what you're working on, I mean, I would be like,
got it.
Right there. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, this is in Yorktown, Virginia. This was a partnership between that group that I called out earlier and the National Park Service. If you know anything about the National Park Service, they like text. And so that's why this is going to be pretty text heavy. However, it does tell a couple of different stories. You'll see here how that text is broken up. Any additional thoughts? Yes?
It doesn't look as official.
Okay. Does not look as official or as polished, perhaps. Okay. You're right. It would not withstand a hurricane. It looks like it's probably wood and plexiglass. We can go to the next one.
It's not too far from Williamsburg, which was a center of government at one time.
Thank you.
There's so much text on there, they could have made two.
You have a point. There's a ton of text on that one. Okay. So we've had the opportunity to, again, take a broad view of what's happening across the nation. I like to say, I'm glad that these folks can give us some ideas, but we're North Carolinians, we're innovators, and so as we delve deeper into our conversation today, we have an idea of what some people have started with, but we can think of how we in this state can do better. I'm actually going to turn this over now to start us talking about some of these local stories to Mr. Jim McKee. How many of you know Jim or have been to Brunswicktown Fort Anderson State Historic Site? Okay, well after all of this, everyone, their hands can go up, say they know Jim, and now everyone has a reason to visit Brunswicktown Fort Anderson. He's been doing tremendous research, and so I'm really grateful that he has come up today to share some of what he's been working on and some of what he knows. He is one of the many experts on this in this area. Yes, thank you, Jim.
The crew's gonna hear that. Do I need a microphone?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep, you're gonna get it from me. And so while you hook yourself up, I'm gonna pull up your
Okay. Well, gravity works. Can you hear me now?
Well, they will have to project. This is for the people who are watching us online. Yep, so you'll have to project.
You ready?
All in hand.
Click. Okay, this was a little bit difficult this slide's a little bit difficult to see, but what we're talking about is the 5 ports of entry into North Carolina. North Carolina was divided into 5 ports: Currituck, Roanoke, Bath, Beaufort, Brunswick. So when you talk about, say, Port Brunswick, we're not talking about just Brunswick. We're talking about Brunswick, Wilmington, all this area going up towards the Beaufort area. Then Beaufort. Beaufort is just going to be, and Brunswick are where the customs offices are going to be. They're where the port collectors are going to be. When you get up to Port Bath, you've got Bath. When you get up to Port Roanoke, you're looking at Edenton. Currituck, I hate to say it, was a port in name only. For the most part, not long after Port Currituck is established, it starts to shoal in. By the early 19th century, Currituck and Roanoke are virtually non-existent. Those 2 ports, they were just very difficult to get into. So to understand these ports of entry, you got to understand why they were put in. Mainly to collect levies, mainly to keep the records. But these ports extend in vast areas. So you can have ships coming into all these different areas. Officially, all ships coming into the Cape Fear have to stop at Brunswick. And Brunswick's interesting. Well, actually, next slide. Since we're on this, since we're here, Port Brunswick is pretty much the entire lower Cape Fear River. Later on, it's going to include Cross Creek, which will later become Fayetteville. Now, one thing about the Cape Fear, when it developed, starting officially in 1725, it almost immediately becomes a plantation society. It's not a society that transforms itself or evolves into a plantation society. No, this was plain and simple, from the get-go, plantation society. By the mid-18th century, 63% of the population is enslaved.
Could you put your hands up for that?
Sure, yeah, and that's what I was getting ready to, yeah. So, prior to 1761, ships will enter the Cape Fear River at the mouth, down here where Southport and Bald Head Island and Oak Island are right now. They go up. Most of them, the ocean-going traffic is stopping at Brunswick. Now, there's a reason. If you look at this next one, they go up. You've got one of the things about this area, it's the only natural deepwater harbor in North Carolina. Southport now is the only natural deepwater. Back in the colonial days, Brunswick was really the only natural deepwater harbor. There were places we had 30 to 35 feet of water prior to 1761. So deep draft vessels could make it. Deep draft vessels could not make it to Wilmington. That doesn't happen until around the 1820s when deep draft vessels. And the reason for that is this area right here. If you've traveled up and down 133, you know Town Creek. You know the Gator Hole. Okay, Town Creek. Even though it's called a creek, it was originally called Indian River. And it has river characteristics. Strong, deep channel. Strong, flowing current. Steep banks. Therefore, all the upstream sediments settle across the Cape Fear River channel, right here at Big Island, or what we call now Campbell Island. So deep draft vessels could not make it to Wilmington. Deep draft vessels had to stop at Brunswick, right down here. Now, coastal trade could make it. 1761 rolls around, September of 1761, an event occurs that we just all endured. It wasn't called Hurricane Florence, but it was almost exactly the same as Hurricane Florence. It was a hurricane that hung on for 4 days. The main difference between that storm and Florence, the winds were stronger. That is the hurricane that opened up New Inlet. New Inlet, right through here, right below Fort Fisher. New Inlet is going to change economically and everything, the Cape Fear, because now ships have two ways into the river. Prior to 1761, ships had to come in through the mouth. So ship river shallower. Prior to 1761, the Cape Fear River was fast, it was deep, it was wide. After 1761, the Cape Fear River kind of turns into a lazy slob. The current starts to slow down. It starts to shoal in at the banks. The channel starts to shoal in. So when you had early days, you had 10, 11 feet, maybe even 12 feet of water at the flats, you end up with 9. So it further impedes traffic up to Wilmington. But it's still the major freeway, and there's still enough water for the deep draft vessels coming from all over the world to make it to Wilmington. Make it to Brunswick. Going back a little bit to the plantation society, if you look at the left side, you can see all the plantations that have been established by 1760, up and down the lower Cape Fear, also on the northeast Cape Fear. And it's because of this plantation society that you get that large number of slaves. These plantations have large tracts of land. They have as a result, have large slave populations. They have not a staple crop of, like a food crop, like rice, but they have a major crop of what we call naval stores: tar, pitch, turpentine, and lumber. That's what these early plantations are doing. They're naval stores. Rice, believe it or not, is being cultivated, but it's not as successful as it would later become. It's really not until 1790, after 1790, post-Revolutionary War, that rice really takes off. Why? Well, in the early, when this area is first developed, naval stores, pine tar, turpentine, pitch, lumber. You're basically picking the low-hanging fruit. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. Rice, while it's being cultivated, it's not considered as quality as what's coming out of South Carolina. It's not until later, like I said, not till the 1790s. Part of that is because the longleaf pines are gone. The longleaf pines have all been timbered. If you know anything about a longleaf pine, it takes 40 years for those things to mature. And once those longleaf pines are gone, that opens the ground up more for the rice. They even try indigo. Indigo is not as successful because it is very, very labor intensive. But there is indigo being shipped out after about 1750. You start seeing it showing up on the export records. Yes, ma'am.
Some of the enslaved people also had quite a lot of knowledge of cultivating rice and how to dig the trenches to fill the rice paddies. So
Correct.
they probably were a great benefit.
Oh, they
I
were.
suppose,
Mhm. Well, you've also got to, you also have to look at who develops, and I use that term loosely, who establishes the Cape Fear, the lower Cape Fear? South Carolinians. Specifically what the people they call the Goose Creek men from Goose Creek, South Carolina, just above above Charleston. The Moors, the Howells, the Lords, the Drys. Just start naming an old name in the lower Cape Fear, I bet you they started in Goose Creek. But that is a naval stores and a rice society. But it's also a lot of trade and business. So when they start getting these first land grants, when Governor George Burlington starts issuing those first land grants in 1725, the Moors, specifically Morris Moore, even though it's spelled Maurice, he did not like the French, he pronounced it Morris. Morris gets the lion's share of the property, of the land grants. But you've got the Davises, the Ancrams, Swans, Lillingtons, they're all getting a piece of the pie, but the Moors are getting the bigger piece. Roger, Morris's younger brother, gets 675 acres that's going to become known as Orton. And Orton's just going to explode over time. But all of them start establishing these plantations. And yes, most of those slaves that are being brought in early on are being brought up from South Carolina. Because a lot of these families sell everything, all their property in Goose Creek. And like, for example, William Dry II in 1736, he sells everything. All of his interests in Goose Creek, puts everything he's got into the Cape Fear. The only thing he brings with him pretty much is household goods and his slaves, a number of his slaves to get established. So a lot of that early trade is coastal trade. Now, the names that you're seeing, first time these names have been seen outside of the original handwriting. These are from the Brunswick County deeds. Highgate the carpenter, he was a slave that belonged to Roger Moore. And when Roger died, he was willed to his son, George Moore. And he was a carpenter. He's the only one that I know of that has a trade that I found so far attached to him. Now, you look at Santee Peter and Elsie. You'll see underneath them, freed. Also in the Brunswick County deeds, you've got from December 6, 1753, Morris Moore to wife Mary and daughter Mary. Quote, my Negro man Santee Peter and his wife Elsie to serve 4 years. Then, if they behave themselves, they are to be clothed with one suit of warm clothes to each and set free.
What about the name Brown? Is that a prominent name during that time?
Which name?
Brown.
As a surname or a first name?
As a surname.
Not that I know of. Because everything I'm finding colonial, there are no last names. Just the first name. The only person I've got so far is Hugh Sparrow. And you see under him apprentice.
Going back a little bit about, you mentioned
Oh, you talking about brown? No. The only brown I have found is Broun, that spelling of brown. And they were literally passing through and trading and ended up in Virginia, in Fredericksburg.
The reason why I asked, my mom tells me there was a brown that owned a lot of property going west of here. And there's a plantation up in Bladen County that the Browns own. Matter of fact, the old slave house is still there. Now it's called the Oakland Plantation, but it's really owned by the Browns.
Okay, I know Oakland. Yeah.
Sits right on the Cape Fear River.
Right. The only thing we can find is, what I'm going on are the land records that I've got now for this area. There's not a lot of Browns mentioned. And when they are, it's because they're in another part of the county. In the western.
There's only one county during that time, that was Hanover.
Well, until 1764. 1764, it splits. Cape Fear River splits, New Hanover and Brunswick County splits off. So when you're looking at these records, I must give Cape Fear Community College and the Wilmington and New Hanover County Register of Deeds office a kudos, because they did the slave deed research, and that's all that information is posted online. If you go to the New Hanover County Register of Deeds office and look up the slave deeds, there's, I think, 2 volumes and maybe a third one's coming out. Yeah, yeah, it's online.
You don't have to go to the office.
No, that's what I say. You just go online, you find it. Yeah, Brunswick County has not. Not yet. No, they haven't done it yet, and I'd like to see that done. Yeah.
What explains Hugh Sparrow's having a last name?
I'm getting to that. Hugh Sparrow. These are to certify that Hugh Sparrow, a mulatto fellow aged about 33 years, was the base son of Mary Sparrow of Lynnhaven Parish in the county of Princess Anne in Virginia, and there was bound and apprenticed by Anthony Walker and Francis Land, church wardens of the above said parish in the year 1729, until he should be of the age of 31, as the Acts of Assembly there requires, and is further to certify that he was first bound to John Landers and by several endorsements assigned over to sundry persons, but lastly to the subscriber, where hath finished and completed the said apprenticeship, and is now a free man, given under my hand and seal at Brunswick this 9th day of April 1756, Richard Quince. So this is a man who was apprenticed. From what we figured out, what do I say, 4 years old? Yeah, he was 4 years old when he was put in this apprenticeship. The last one here. Hannah. You see Hannah here. Hannah Freed. These are the certified, these are kind of the good stories, if you can say that. These are to certify whom it may concern that Hannah, formerly a slave to my mother Rebecca Dry, deceased, was by her will left to be free at and after the first day of this present instant, November 1759, for good and faithful service to her late mistress. By the way, that's the only period in the last 2. I do therefore declare her to be free from this date from me and any other person whatsoever, and I do desire that no person may molest her from going where she pleases, she behaving herself as she ought to do. Dated at Brunswick, November the 2nd, 1759, William Dry.
This is interesting because I'm a part of the Dry family.
What would you like to know?
I'm just interested about that name, and that name, where a lot of these Dries come from, is that plantation up there in Bladen County.
See, this Dry is from Goose Creek. Now, William Dry II moved here in 1736. His son, William III, was 16 when he moved here. And William Dry III is really the man that ties together the bulk of the history of Port Brunswick. He's the captain of the militia that expelled the Spanish in 1748. He is the port collector and possible instigator of the Stamp Act crisis in February of 1766. He's the last owner of Russellboro, the former governor's house, when it's burned by the British in 1776. So he really does tie it all together. And he was a major player in both slaves, economics. You name something that happened in the Cape Fear, he had his finger in it, one way or another. 2 minutes? Okay. Last one. Now for the sad part. There's, in your packets, you'll see a list of merchants. I'm trying to think which one it was, that has merchants who were slave traders. As of last night, I found another one. And for those of us from Brunswick County, you're not going to be happy for the name. Robert Howe. General Robert Howe. Some of the stuff I have found, just the sheer numbers, they're not staggering, but it's enough to say, yes, he was a slave trader. These right here are sad. Edward Wingate, he's appraising his slaves. You've got Christopher Keynes, who's the county coroner, also the county sheriff. I haven't figured, and these are 21 slaves that he sold at public sale at Brunswick in June of 1769. I don't know if these are slaves that he actually bought or he confiscated or were turned over to him for a debt. I don't know. That I don't know yet. A lot of this information is brand spanking new. We're finding it every day. Every day. Give you a quick example. The big project that I'm working on right now out at Brunswick is what I'm calling the Refugee Crisis. In March of 1865, nearly 10,000 refugees were sent to Wilmington who had followed Sherman's army up from South Carolina. When Sherman crossed the Cape Fear River to go into Fayetteville, the bridges were cut. Now, it wasn't like what he had done earlier in the campaign and left them to their own devices. No, there was a plan. These refugees were sent down the river. Granted, most of them had to walk to Wilmington. When they got to outside of Wilmington, they were dispersed to the plantations and the old fortifications along the river. Fort Anderson, where I'm at, was the largest. It was supposed to hold 1,500. In May of 1865, there was 3,600 people there. And to make matters worse, it was a death camp. Meaning if you were sick, if you were feeble, they sent you there. There was the fort was quarantined off. There was no communications in or out of the fort. No visitors in or out of the fort during March, April, and May. And according to the U.S. Surgeon's report, 2,000 people perished. In how many weeks? 9 weeks, 2,000 people. Yeah, I'd call that a refugee crisis. That's what we're focused, at the site, that's really what we're focused on right now. And we're very close to getting our findings done. So even though we talk a lot about the colonial trade, you got to remember that trade went on up. You know, it went up to 1860, 1861. And it doesn't die off until 65. But even after that, there's still the struggle. So that's what I've got. I hope this ties some things together, explains the port system. Yeah.
Can you show that map again?
Sure.
As far as the ships. Can you show us?
This one or the other?
No.
The other one.
Yeah. How, like during the Civil War, which way?
The blockade runners and everything?
Yeah.
Okay. Real quick, the Union blockade pretty much focused from Masonboro down around and out towards Lockwood Folly or Shallotte Inlet. So you're looking at a solid 50-mile arc that the blockade vessels are trying to encompass. But you got to remember, even though these two inlets are only separated by 4 miles, Bald Head sticks out another 2 miles, And then Frying Pan Shoals sticks down another 24 miles. So yeah, you got a 50-mile arc that the Federals have to take care of and watch. They never had enough ships. 75% of all vessels, blockade running vessels, in or out, were successful. Even though you look at a chart that shows all the wrecks, the captures, everything, 75% of the vessels going in and out were successful. The primary tactic was to come in by the beach and literally run through the surf. Every now and then they had to run straight through, but you had a lot of those vessels in and out like that. Did I answer? Okay.
I have one question for you.
Sure.
Thank you for sharing some of your new research. Again, Jim is researching constantly, and so again, he's sharing some of what he's just recently uncovered. So
Like
I'm
last
really
night.
grateful. Last night. So I'm grateful to you. To kind of tie us back to the conversation that we're about to have, do we have an idea of how many enslaved peoples disembarked directly from the African continent to this area?
We're working on that.
Okay.
In 1760, and when I say working on it, last night, 1768, it looks like 60, it says 60 were disembarked at Brunswick. In 1769, 36 in Bath.
Great, thank you.
So that's what we've got right now.
And so there is a disembarkation story that is connected to this area, and we know it's at least 60 individuals.
And the port records, by the way, the port records, oh God. I'm not going to say they're a nightmare to read, but they are. They're a nightmare to read. And they're scattered. There's huge gaps in them. If you get the ones that are in Raleigh, there's sections of them that have just kind of washed away, or something ate it. I mean, it's really sad. But there is enough information that we can glean quite a bit.
Thank you, Jim.
All right. Thank you.
And please go visit him at Brunswick Town, Fort Anderson. I'm sure he'd be happy to welcome you. And now I'm going to turn this over to my co-facilitator, Janine Bryant, who is the principal and founder of Facilitate Movement, LLC, which is based out of Charlotte. And so she's going to lead us through our discussion that's connected to some of what we were talking about.
All right, so hello everyone. My name is Janine Bryant, and my role here really is to help you all talk about some of the things that you've just learned, some of the things you came in knowing, and to help us tie that all together into, as Angela was talking about, the markers that across the state of North Carolina, we've been up and down the coast for the last few months. And some of you have actually had the opportunity to come with us to several sites. But in order for us to do that, there's a couple things we need to do. And so I'm going to walk us through the process of answering some questions. We're going to use those questions to help guide us in our thinking about the markers. And so I'll facilitate us through those questions. And I want to start by doing a small reflection. So you just heard a lot of information. Many of you came here with a sense of why you were coming. So when you saw the flyer, or you saw a notification, or you saw the newspaper article about this, or saw it on social media, you came for a reason, right? So I want to give you just a few minutes, about, let's say a minute and a half, to use the questions. I don't see anybody with their questions. I want you to use the questions in your packet here. This packet. Can I hold this for just a second? So you have a packet that looks like, it'll have one page that looks like this. You have a lot of paper, I understand. There's 3 questions on that packet, and those questions are going to mirror what I have here. I'll read them out to you, and I want you to take a moment to reflect, because we've deliberately designed these questions to get you thinking about historically what has happened in Wilmington.
It's also on the agenda.
Yes, so it's built in on your agenda as well. So it's either here or here. There's 2 places where you might see these questions. So the first question asks, how has North Carolina been shaped by the experience of enslaved people from this port? So in part, Jim McKee just gave us a great overview of that. So if you didn't know that much about that, that's a lot of what he was situating are the experience of those who were enslaved, how it's influenced crops, what were our most supported exports, what did that look like in our community. The second question gets us to think about what that continuing legacy is. Someone earlier mentioned that. How does the legacy of slavery continue? Oh, that's only half a question. What impact does the legacy of slavery continue to have in North Carolina? Should be the way your question reads. Okay, so this is going to make us, I want us literally all in the room to start thinking about, there were things that happened in colonial era, post-colonial era, civil rights, Civil War era, post-Civil War era, Reconstruction era, Civil Rights era. I want to start thinking through and thinking about, like, how did the experience of those who were enslaved in Wilmington continue to manifest a presence and legacy, and maybe even today? So that's number 2. Okay, so past, present, and then the last question asks, where does our community go from here? That's to get us to think about what happens in the future. So if we think about the marker as helping us tell a story, someone said it earlier, how do we connect what previously happened to what continues to happen? We're looking for that through line. I want to give you just a minute. I'm going to stop talking. Please reflect, write down any any thoughts you have related to that, and then we're going to jump in and get started. That's not my stuff. Jot down your answers. So as we get started, there's a couple of things I want to help reiterate before we start talking amongst ourselves and I start writing on these big Post-it notes. What we know about the sites of disembarkation is actually quite small. And that's just the reality. Despite copious amounts of research and people digging into records, the reality is that we actually really know very little. So while we might know the names and we might know the hurricane dates, and we have precious and detailed records, sometimes resting in archives or in church records, what we know about those who were enslaved is actually a fraction of their real lived experience. So I want us to bear that in mind. These untold stories are still affecting us. And as we can see, there are people in this room whose lives are not only entangled, but are a direct result of the people who were enslaved. Their lives are deeply entangled in these stories. We want to be very respectful about how we talk about the experience of those who were enslaved in North Carolina, and in Wilmington in particular, as we're having this conversation. And our work here is to breathe life into those stories and to think about the reality that they experienced. And so as we're doing that, my charge to you all is to be very careful about your language, and to realize that some people may have vastly different understandings or perspectives around this experience. It doesn't mean they're wrong or right, but this is the space in which we will share those stories and those perspectives. And my job here is in part to make sure that we hear from as many people as possible, and that we honor those who are deeply entrenched in experiencing this first. Okay? All right. So with that, let's get started. I have these really big pieces of paper up, really to help me remember what you say. And I was writing furiously as Jim was talking, because a lot of what he was saying feeds directly into this first question. How have we been shaped by the experience of those who were enslaved here? So when we think about those sites of disembarkation up and down the coast of North Carolina, we've been to Bath and Edenton and Somerset, New Bern last week, or 2 weeks ago. And so here we are. We're looking for things that are directly tied to Wilmington, Port Brunswick. We're looking for the stories that are very specific here. Okay? So I'm sure Jim can call out some things for us. He called out a number of crops, for instance. But let's just start thinking about that and name it so we can make it really clear. And I'm going to write it down as we are going forward with that. Somebody get us started. You can call it out. Naval stores. Okay, there we go. All right. Keep going.
Railroads.
Say a little bit more about that.
Wilmington was the largest railroad in the world.
Okay. Thank you. Others? They were the largest slaver? They were a large enslaver. Okay, so that's directly tied to the experience of those who were enslaved. Okay. Okay.
Rice.
Rice. Thank you. Rice cultivation along the coast. Obviously going to be a source of income. Cotton. Okay. We have a couple of crops named. Any other crops or exports that we should know about? Tobacco. Somebody said something else. Indigo. Okay. Lumber. Someone just said something. Say it a little bit louder. Turpentine. Okay. So we have naval stores, railroad, rice, cotton, tobacco, indigo, lumber, turpentine. We have a lot of crops. Do we have professions or specialized labor? Carpenter, stonemasons. Okay. Somebody had their hand raised in the butt. Blacksmith. Okay.
Stevedores.
Okay. So, somebody had a hand raised in the back. I want to make sure I heard. Music. Okay. Can you say a little bit more about that?
I think, for example, I'm not sure specifically, the banjo is an instrument which was brought from Africa. There's a whole tradition that people know more about than I do of how the music from Africa influenced the music in the United States.
Abolition is
An abolitionist population here? Is that what somebody just said? Abolition. Okay. I'm about to spell abolitionist wrong.
Religion.
Say it. Say it. You gotta speak up a little bit. Like y'all can't hear it, but there's like some kind of roaring thing right here beside me. So if you don't speak up, that's why I keep saying. What did you say?
Religion.
Religion. Okay. Say a little bit more about it.
It could have been good. It could have been bad.
Okay. Okay. I'm not sure that's what religious what faith traditions did we Catholic? Okay. You said Catholic or
Yeah.
Catholicism, and there was somebody over here. What did you say? Yeah.
Music was a way for African American slaves to perpetuate their oral stories and their oral traditions.
Okay, oral traditions. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, oral traditions. We have music. I missed now. I want to make sure I captured what you said. You're sitting in the front row. Okay. Indoctrination. Yeah, that's an important part. So that's a clarification. It's not just religion, but indoctrination, using religious ideals, which is different than African experience. I mean, African influenced religions. Okay. All right.
Someone called out David Walker.
David Walker?
Yeah.
Say more of the person who called out David Walker.
David Walker appealed into three verses. And he hated slavery. He hated slavery. This was shortly after the American Revolutionary War. William Hooker, who signed the Declaration of Independence in Wilmington, was one of the cities that rebelled against taxation. So
Okay.
you still had that kind of lingering over during the American Revolutionary War.
Okay.
And we do have a cemetery in Wilmington on 3rd and Market that have, is it Cornelius Harnett, who's buried in that cemetery.
It's part of St. James Church.
Y'all are about to be the first group that makes me go to a second sheet. All right. Score. Now, I started writing down some real specific things that I heard kind of in the background. If you're naming streets, or you're naming cemetery sites or locations, that's actually really important, because some of the sites that we visited, they say we want to make sure that the marker is as close to the site of disembarkation as possible. Some of the sites say we want to make sure the marker is embedded in the communities where the majority of people were. So, and that's different, right? Because there might have been usually the ports of disembarkation, the sites of disembarkation, were high commerce sites, but they weren't necessarily highly populated by enslaved Africans, right?
So would it be Brunswick County?
So this is part of the conversation. This is the part of the conversation, right? So this is part of us thinking about that. How do we mark that? Yeah.
Or has anyone asked yet that the markers be placed instead in, this is gonna sound really crazy. Has anyone asked yet that markers be placed not only in places of disembarkation or in the places where the highest concentration of enslaved peoples were, but in the area where the majority of the people who are still living and who have profited the most from those enslaved people are living?
Yes. So that's been a part of the conversation. I think it was at Somerset where people were they very much emphasized that, particularly this question in question 3, so I wrote placement down here and I'm going to put it on as a holder. At Somerset, they emphasized that the economies that were built on the backs of those who were enslaved are what supported the development of that community, right? And so if you think about that, then there's a definite through line, because all of the economic infrastructure was upheld by enslaving and sustaining slavery as a way to gain profit, and it's through all these things, right? So I'm gonna add a placeholder here and we can get back to it. So you all were rattling them off there for a minute, and then I added another piece of paper and you got quiet. So, okay, so let's keep going real quick and then we're gonna go to question 2, yes.
I don't know much about it, but there's like a informational thing at the bottom of Orange Street.
Orange Street?
On Water Landing.
Underground Railroad. Underground, that's been identified by the national.
So it's a national site. Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna add Orange Street marker.
Bellamy mentioned about Goose.
Yeah, there's one there that's also schools on that.
He's the one that left and escaped over the river.
Right, that's the one.
By naval ship.
Okay.
He left a diary. The diary was found by a relative that gives an account of his escape in Civil War history.
Okay.
It's called Diary of a Contraband.
All right, Diary of a Contraband.
Literature.
Absolutely.
Why there for the military?
All right, so we're adding militaries. Other things we want to be sure to note. Can you say more?
Laundresses and seamstresses and dressmakers and cookers, sometimes free, but for escape from alive free necessarily. There's a lot of skilled. They're more free African American women than men in 1860s.
Yeah.
They've clearly found a path.
Absolutely.
Enslaved.
And I think, I think in many cases, when we look at this list and we might think about the crop, and then we also think about those who worked the crops, right? Those who had the knowledge, but someone said it earlier, those who brought the knowledge to be skilled in rice cultivation. That's a very specific skill, and it's very different than cultivating cotton or tobacco or indigo. Okay, great. So we have a pretty rigorous list here. These are living, so at any point we can add to it. And I have a couple of Post-it notes here, and there's a couple on that table, so that as we're going, if you have a thought, Kimmy's going to pass out some of the Post-it notes. If you have a thought and you want to add something specific, you can just write it on the Post-it note, and then at the end we'll go and add it to the list. So I want to think about question 2. What is the continued legacy? So this is where we start to bring it to the present day. And you all were just starting to do that and thinking about what does the present day look like and how are the influences that we see continued on. Okay, so tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, there's a definite, clear dividing line in Wilmington. I'm not exactly sure where that line is, because I don't live here, but there's a 6 to 17. Yeah.
Okay, so a continued economic disparity.
Where you
and education.
But then we had a peak after slavery.
Okay.
Where we didn't have that. Then afterwards, because of
Oh, well, yeah, 1898, they're going that other.
Everything was going along.
They're going the other
Somebody got
page.
jealous.
Yeah, 1898.
The bottom dropped out of everything.
All right, so we'll note that 1898 peak. And of course, Wilmington was a model for other communities up until that peak, right? Yes.
Former enslavers received compensation or reparations from the federal government for their loss of property.
Okay.
But the formerly enslaved never received a penny and still haven't.
Okay.
So reparations needs to be, lack of reparations.
All right, got it. I saw a hand. Yes.
There's no transparency on the true history of what happened. I was born and raised here, went to elementary school, junior high, and high school. Learned nothing about 1898 race riots.
Not only the race riots, but about some of the leaders, such as Alfred, Anthony Howe, Pompey, that family, and all of the fire departments that were here.
I want you to write down that whole name for me instead of me struggling in front of y'all to write it. so we're going to do. Yeah, I have my pride. Yes.
She looks like a teacher.
Mental health. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And you said something a little bit after mental health. Can you say it a little bit?
I was saying there has never been any healing for the traumas of slavery.
All right, so mental health, community trauma.
I would say that goes into also health outcomes.
All right, health outcomes. Ooh. All right. So we've talked about continued legacy in the form of economic disparities that have continued and persisted, educational experience, that there's no transparency. You could go through a K-12 education here and not necessarily know a full and rigorous history related to Wilmington's, particularly the experience of enslaved people.
That was not taught in the school.
Not taught at all. Yeah, so he stated there's no transparency, but then we could just say absolute lack. That's not just not transparency, it's just an absolute lack.
Here up to a point who were afraid to talk about it because of the death of the other family members.
Absolutely.
They didn't want to talk about it. They tried to, pretend they were afraid to discuss it.
Yeah. So I think the persistence of fear is a real thing. And it's not, we might think, well, that was, long ago, but it's not that long ago. This could This could be the experience of someone's great-grandparent.
Most of
Right.
it continues now.
Right.
It slowly comes,
Right.
some of it is bubbling to the top now, but, you know, it's been like that for a long time, and a lot of people are still in major denial about a lot of stuff.
So in many cases, these are the ways in which those who were enslaved have experienced hardship, trials. Can we also think about the experience and the legacy of persistence, the resilience, persistence, celebrations, lived experience? I want a full picture here. Yes.
There are still a lot of vibrant religious communities.
Okay. Can you say more about that? Give me an example.
Particularly in Navassa, I work with the Postal Interest, and they just purchased Reeves Chapel, so they're trying to get that community back to restore that building.
Okay.
There's this old church.
Can you tell me the name of the church?
Oh,
Reeves Chapel.
Reeves
Chapel. R-E-A-V-E-S.
All right. Thank you. Okay.
Today's artists and sculptors and poets.
Can you name someone that's sticking out to you in your memory?
Minnie Evans.
They're celebrating at camp.
Catherine Yarborough.
We have Ivy Hayes.
Catherine Yarborough.
Catherine Yarborough.
International.
Katrina Yarborough, dancer.
Someone's gonna have to give me a lot of post-it notes after this. It's okay. Sports. Okay.
Ivy Hayes.
Meadowlark. Meadowlark Summit.
Okay. Were y'all naming off sports figures or? Okay. When you have that post-it note, write down the actual. And I just don't want to slow us down because we're running on time. Yes. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Appreciate you. So we have, yes.
I was just going to say, I don't think we mentioned on the negative side voter suppression.
Voter suppression, okay. Still happening? I heard somebody say still happening? Okay. I actually can spell gerrymandering, as a matter of fact.
We have faces.
Land loss? Black land loss. So, it seems to me that there was another hand, yes. Could I write that as foodways?
Say that again, I didn't.
She said food.
Oh, yeah, we got food deserts all over the, well, I know I live in one. Food deserts for some reason.
Is the impact we've had positive.
Oh, definitely.
Like, y'all be eating shrimp and grits. That's
what I'm
you
thinking.
regular
I'm thinking
shrimp when you only got so many children when you put it over the grits and rice.
Right.
But it's an adopted cuisine thing now.
So I see a couple of hands, yes.
We're talking about positive aspects, we gotta mention the free black community.
Okay.
That's the thing.
Okay.
It's a strange thing to talk about in the context of slavery, but we have a large population of free African American people here for decades before the Civil War.
Okay.
And a lot of those people, a lot of those families are the ones that wound up making a real mark in the culture of the town, and they started out enslaved.
Okay. And remember, at this point, we're thinking about continued legacies, right? So we are moving through not only sites of disembarkation, but we're thinking about, okay, when you have an experience of people who are enslaved, and then they are continuing to live and persist in a community. Yes?
As odd as this is going to sound, but it's a point of pride for most North Carolinians, Tar Heels. Working those naval stores. I mean, that's one of the ways North Carolinians got that moniker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Black entrepreneurship, barbershops and beauty salons in particular.
Katarina Yarborough came from a barbershop.
Say that one more time.
Katarina Yarborough, the first
She's at me.
Okay.
Family ran a big barbershop in town. Willis Richardson, the first black man to have a play on Broadway. It's from
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Couple more hands. Okay, and then we're gonna move to the next question. Yes.
So I think we should add Williston as a positive.
Williston?
Williston School, Williston, it was Williston, started off as Williston Normal, and then they went to Williston Industrial High School, and then Williston Senior High School.
Yeah.
It was started off by the Williston family out of Boston, missionary.
21.
Got it. And I saw one more hand. Are we okay with this? Now remember, you have Post-it notes and you can keep going.
You know, I think we should put St. Stephen's up there.
Okay, which I'm familiar with, actually.
St. Stephen's. We've been reading the marker just throughout that church marker. That's the first place that you can see the work of the slaves.
Right. Right.
You know.
All right, so we're going to round this out with this last question. Where do we go from here? So there's already been a question now, a comment around consideration of placement, because as Jim McKee's map showed us, this is a longer space, and this actually is true for Somerset had a similar issue. We can talk about the actual location of the port, where people ended up, where people were primarily living. Edenton had a similar issue, where people were transported to was not exactly the same place that people landed. So we need to do some thinking around that. What does it mean for this area? But there are also things about, what does this look like? What does this feel like if we bring this up till today and we go back to that original, someone in the back said, if we were really connecting this history right through to what continues to happen today, right? If we're really trying to do that, what are some things that we have to encompass? Yeah.
I think exposing and asking for accountability about racism that's going on in our public schools.
Okay. So, you mean the marker itself and how we talk about the marker should be linked to?
I'm sorry, I'm off the subject of markers, my mistake.
Okay. So we're moving into the direction of getting kind of focus a point on what does this look like and feel like for us to talk about this. So another way of saying that may be that we have an educational component with whatever comes from this project. There's an educational component that needs to expose and relate to the racism that has been experienced ongoing.
I guess related to the monuments, the thing that seems important to me is that it be some kind of symbol that says something to people who are living with the legacy of slavery in different ways, both positive and maybe in some kind of view that makes us not think we're just reading something that's finished.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
This is not a fairy tale.
And
truth and transparency.
And we have to start with the educators that are imparting the knowledge by having or requiring that every teacher or person that works in the system goes through a sensitivity, cultural awareness of Black America and its impact on the lives of the Black children.
I would say any government service position, in any government.
That's the way it was in one of the systems that worked.
Because you still see black codes from 1840s being implemented today as an entrepreneur.
Right.
Okay, so I've added that. I rewrote that a little bit of curriculum support to teachers and government officials. I'm going to add cultural competence.
School board, administration, all of them. Everybody needs to go through it.
All right. So a symbol of truth,
around the continued legacy of racism, curriculum support to teachers, government officials, anybody who is in charge of imparting, and particularly imparting wisdom to children and youth. Yes.
Acknowledging the harms and honoring the resiliency.
Okay.
Yeah. I'd like for it to also make a statement about reparations, if at all possible.
Interesting. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Gosh, there's so much to be said about it. It's time. It's way overdue. While the enslavers received reparations, the enslaved and their descendants never did.
I'm still waiting on my 40 acres and a mule.
What is that?
That was the original promise of reparation. Yeah. Yes. What? Okay. Who am I looking for?
In the suit.
Suit. Yes. One and then two.
Just piggybacking on the reparations.
Yes.
Education.
Okay.
Yeah, I think because we don't necessarily have 40 acres. I'd like to think, I'm not sure, but I don't necessarily think we have 40 acres and a mule to give to every black person who deserves reparation. But what we can do to the descendants here is offer them education at four-year college for free.
How about $1 million in a Maserati?
As far as economic power.
Okay.
Yeah.
And bear in mind, some of this may seem, it may be the first time you've ever heard of anybody bring up reparations as a part of acknowledging the experience of those who were enslaved. That is an ongoing conversation literally since people were enslaved. So even though it might be the first time you're hearing about it, that doesn't mean that it's not real. And so a statement of reparations is one way, is a form of acknowledgement. And many people are doing this in lots of different ways. They're acknowledging the histories of people who've been traditionally marginalized in our communities. That looks a lot of different ways. One way that has been proposed continuously is to find ways to channel free support of educational materials, resources, curriculum, access for those who have been most marginalized. So those who have been deliberately excluded now get deliberately included. So yes, that is something that has been kind of milling around. Any other thoughts? Yes.
I think it's imperative that the full truth of what actually happened during enslavement be shared. A lot of times it's sugar-coated or euphemisms are given for things, and I think as horrible as it was, I think it's very important to give the full truth. And I think along with that is to make those connections from the time that we were enslaved to now, because we are still currently and presently being affected by those things. We're not as far away as we think, and I think it's important to highlight that as we're making these historical markers and other historical references.
Okay, so I wrote that as truthful and explicit connections on the marker. So, I think sugarcoating is in part some of the ways that we've gotten here. We have detailed records of some people's lives and don't even know the last names of other people. Okay. Yes?
I wonder if there's any way to ask people who have read it, to look for connections in their life and look for maybe the other marker in town, or get involved with Link organization that's maybe that seal that's on some of the previous markers. I don't know, just a way to ask, like a call to action.
Yeah, and someone said that earlier, and I wrote that down. So I didn't forget all the things you all were saying earlier, and just to quickly review, you all wanted it to be visible and inviting. You wanted it to have time periods included. You wanted there to be an explicit naming of enslaved Africans, rather than to just title it something that has nothing to do with Africans but happens to be a port name. You wanted it to be attention grabbing. You wanted there to include prominent images. You wanted it to resist small and high text. You thought the embossed letters would work better and be more sustainable in your weather conditions. You appreciated the art piece because it had emotional resonance. You wanted it to be provocative. You wanted to connect the then and the now. And you asked that there be a call to action implicit in the piece. And you also asked that it somehow consider color coding, and that it also invite the power of symbolism into the work. So that was what you originally said. I have that, even if you're not saying it now. Tracy, and then, yes.
And I don't know, I'm not saying this is Wilmington specific, but maybe if it can be with something with all of our markers, because I know it's oftentimes said that slavery was a long time ago.
Right.
And if people think in reality, it's not that many generations where we stand from slavery. And I think that we need to have that somewhere where we can talk about how many generations. I mean, you have some people that are only 3 or 4 generations, and that's not, we have 3 or 4 generations living right now. So it doesn't seem like it's really far once you think about it in that manner.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And actually, you all are the first site that have wanted explicit time, have been explicit about having time on the marker.
Because that generational will show, if we use Wilmington specific, we can talk about the disembarkation,
right.
The whole institution, the freedom, and then we go right into the riots. How they now we're in the riots. Well, we did this. Now we don't even want you here. So get out of our town altogether.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that can bring it a full circle.
Yeah.
If you look at it.
Thank you.
We have, several of us have mentioned symbols.
Yes.
I think one symbol or symbols that have to be addressed with these Confederate markers around town.
Now, I'm not sure I'm going to write that. But I think when we talk about symbols of truth in narratives and narrative recreation, that's real. And in part, markers and monuments and any kind of memorialization is an effort to create a narrative. And so that's one of the reasons why we're trying to get you all to think about really, how do you really couch the language that you're using so that it's honoring the reality of those who were enslaved, right? Because if you think about some of those markers that Angela showed you, some of them were explicit about the experience of enslaved people, but nothing about the title or anything said anything about enslaved, right? It's like, here you are on the trail, welcome to our place. Yeah.
We're working to put this marker out.
Yes.
Honors the enslaved people who were brought to these shores. But right there on 3rd and Dock, there's a symbol of people who went to the death to keep them enslaved.
Right. Yeah. And that's real.
It's real.
That's very real. So you want me to write it down is what you're saying? Okay. No. You're saying now write it down.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Wow. Oh, yeah. I hadn't thought about that.
How close is it to the people? Right. And I spend a lot of time thinking about Confederate markers. So yes, and it does make a difference in how we tell those stories. I would like to give her opportunity. We haven't heard as much from her. So then 1, 2, 3. Yes.
I'm quiet tonight. When you're doing this and you talk about where the community goes, are you looking at all of the communities having a common symbol on what their markers or their thing might be, or will each community be different? Because if it's a trail of some type, right. I'm gonna drive up it and make my grandchildren go with me.
Right. So Angela's gonna speak a little bit more about this. There's definite talks around how this can be manifested as a trail. There are lots of trails that go through the commission. Yeah. And so it's not unreasonable. And since I've been at these sites, I know you can drive to them. Yeah. It takes a long time, but you can drive to them, and you can actually take the trail and see where the ports are that were exactly in the map that he showed earlier. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to write that down so we don't forget. But that's a real thing that we are already very conscious of. And then yes, in the back. Sorry.
I just want to say there's a strange problem of erasure in this city. We know how important slavery was to its history, how many slaves were sold here, trafficked here. But if you ask a Wilmington person, even someone who's fairly well educated about the town, where did it happen? Nobody has any idea. And I think one of the reasons for that is that where it happened is right downtown, right where that Confederate marker is now. The old courthouse used to be in the middle of Market Street.
That's why it's called Market Street.
Underneath the courthouse, they had these things they called the shambles. They were like stables almost, and that's where most of the slaves got sold, and it's right there. It's
at the federal building.
At the heart of the city. And if we're going to commemorate it, I think it ought to be
right there.
Well, and that's why it's called Market Street.
That That was the market house. A lot of things got sold there. One of the things that got sold was human flesh. And I think that's the reason for that erasure in part, is that if we were going to be honest about it, we'd have to really put it in everybody's face.
Put it right there on the market and
I mean, there's a
water.
Confederate statue right where the slaves got sold. It's literally standing on top of the.
And that's probably no accident.
Yes. So I added the word resist erasure. It is actually no accident, and I can tell you this because we've now gone to sites all over where they have burned courthouses, they have erased it deliberately. I'm saying they, but as an act of very deliberate erasure, it's very consistent. It is not a mistake, y'all. At this point, we've listened. This is our 5th site. It is not a mistake. It is very consistent. Yes.
As far as the symbols of truth, we should name the culprits in the signs.
Okay.
Because there are people in this city that are being honored with parks that were directly involved in the 1898 resurrection.
Hey, Angela, Richard had a question.
No, I'll pass.
You pass, okay.
And we will be around so you can engage directly. Yes.
Hi, this is a little off topic, but I'd just like to say a word in favor of archaeology.
Okay.
And helping to uncover like the past of people who've been erased or people who've tried to erase it. Archaeology can go a long way in terms of excavating some of these hidden, buried pasts.
But who has accessibility to it? I mean,
Property,
And also a plug for the UNCW Archaeological Field School.
But it's important to us as African Americans to know our culture, or whenever they go and clear land in our community. I mean, they contact us about other little insignificant things. Like right now, we have one of the railroad bridges that's located between Campbell and Brunswick Street on 6th Street. They're building new homes under the bridge, which is beautiful.
But you don't know.
But you know, we do not have representation as far as what did they find under those bridges. And if, I mean, just a community volunteer like myself, you know, like myself or anybody else who's interested, I mean, they should look to, just like someone said, to have transparency.
But it's not
And that's unfair to us as tax-paying citizens. That's unfair to us as a culture of people with an identity who are proud of our struggle, of our ancestors' struggle. And so the constant disrespect, and our children grow in that environment and they see it, they dislike it, and they're angry.
And that's.
And ma'am, you know, the thing that how they'll get around that is, well, we did put it in the paper.
But we don't have access.
No,
We live in the community. We live in the community. What do they find? I mean, how do we gain access to archaeology reports? Do we have to be a student?
The excavation of those areas. They'll say, well, we put it in the paper.
So I do want to. I want to say I wrote down archaeology. I wrote down access, and I wrote down land. Because the issues around land equity are persistent, and what you were calling out is also a persistent injustice.
Just like the Native American.
It's absolutely, it's very consistently happening across the country.
That is a part of our history.
Yes, and it fits right in with the conversation of reparations. And there's a very, very obvious shift in processes that's happening right now. And so I think increasingly people will be calling out when they see these kinds of injustices, and it won't go unnoticed or unnamed. So I think that there is a shift happening right now in archaeological and the archivist process, in museology. I think it's all happening to do more acknowledgement and to work towards it. And I say that as a museum professional and former teacher. So, you all, we have hit our time. But I do want to say that you should have, each of you should have on your table a Post-it note that you can write us notes. If you want to write notes on your documents, on your papers, and you want to give that to me as well, I'm going to distribute the papers again so that you can put your note onto the question that it aligns to. We type these notes up and use them as an appendix to a short summary that is given to her that helps map out what each community says around what they want and need in a marker.
So,
Can you add, that's Angela's turf. Sorry.
let me ask this. So how will we know?
That's also Angela's turf.
Okay.
All
Angela the Angel.
That's Angela's turn.
To the stage to tell you what's next. Great. Okay.
Two.
Wow. So, I'm sorry. Oh, get the mic. Oh, sorry. Get the mic. Thank you. Wish we had two of these. Sorry, y'all. Okay. Thank you so much for a fruitful, raw, and honest discussion. And sort of that question, how will we know? Kind of is a segue into what I like to share about next steps. So this is a process. We're in the very beginning of this process. I personally have a very big vision for this initiative. Ms. Maxwell, I'm hoping that this will become a trail that's connecting all of those places that you saw on some of my very early slides. But we have to start somewhere. And this is our starting point, to get feedback from communities around what this first piece, these markers, could look like. But again, I imagine this could be a trail system that's really supplemented by some of the resources that you all were calling out that we need to have as well. So again, this is the beginning. However, we do plan to stay in contact and in communication with you all. And so up here you see I have put my email address up here. You will likely get emails from myself or Kima, but if you want to reach both of us, this is the best email address to communicate with us. That is ncaahc@ncdcr.gov. Again, we both have access to this email inbox. And so if there is information that you did not share out today that you'd like us to have, you can email us here. And again, if you just like to be in communication with us about this project, that is a way to reach us. Okay? Additionally, I hope that everyone had the opportunity to write down their emails as they came in outside, because that will be a way for us to communicate with you all directly as well. Okay? Okay. Oh, that's what's happening. I'm like, what is going on? Kima is passing out a survey. So yes, if you fill out that survey, that will help us as we move forward as well. And I think there's a spot for you to put your email on that as well. We're kind of trying to compile a list of all of the communities across the state that have been involved in this process so that we can talk with you directly. Now, everyone got that card at the very beginning. You wrote down that person who has made an impact on your life, an African-American person. I ask that you take that card and you share that story on social media, if you're connected to social media, with one of these hashtags or both of these hashtags, NC Black History and NC Black Heritage, because that's another way we are documenting this process. And finally, take that card and give it to someone else. Share that story and share about this project, because each of you has networks and communities and friends and family and loved ones that aren't here today, and we want to spread this as widely as possible. Again, I thank you for being here with us today. This is a very, very early step in what is destined to be a long journey, but I'm really grateful that you all are on this journey with us. You can leave your surveys outside with Kima. She's also created a space for you to put paper notes and those sticky notes outside that you can leave behind as well. And I will pass it to Commissioner Rhodes to close off.
Well, I do want to say that Wilmington appreciates your efforts, and Brunswick County.
Thank you.
But I also want to mention that I would like to thank Deborah Maxwell, president of the NAACP.
Yes, for spreading the word.
I would like to thank our chair of the New Hanover County Democratic Party.
Thank you.
For keeping the vision going, for keeping it out there in front of all of us. that these events are important. And they will keep it out there for further discussion.
Thank you.
And I'm
Terrific.
hoping that it will impact the students in New Hanover County.
Yeah.
And Brunswick County schools.
Yes.
They
And
need that.
To that point, I failed to mention, thank you. I'm not doing this alone. You've heard from Tracy, you've seen Kima, you've seen Janine, but we also have an entire advisory board of people from across the state that are helping us through this process. And so Jim McKee, our passionate researcher, is one of our advisory board members, but also Dr. Nora Reber, who's in the back saying, archaeology, talk to me. She is one of those advisors as well. And so if you have additional questions about this process, there's some of your local folks that you can connect with as well.
And just
Okay.
call me.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you. We can leave those on the,
I want to
great.
invite you all to
Mhm.
stay a little bit longer. We have Frankie Roberts is
Okay.
over here. He's actually the person whose name I wrote down for celebrating Black heritage here in town. We are co-facilitators of a group called Coming to the Table. The mission of Coming to the Table is to provide leadership, resources, and a supportive environment for all who wish to acknowledge and heal wounds from racism that is rooted in United States history of slavery. So I want to invite you to stick around for our chapter meeting, and one of the things that we'll be doing is making some decisions about when our next meeting will be. So here's a flyer with some more information. Please stick around. Many of our members are here right now.
Thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am. And if you can't stick around tonight, just be in touch with me. My email address is on the flyer, and I'll.
Is the next meeting